But first, let's go to Norwich to look at that new, I'm tempted to say revolutionary, Lotus suspension system, for which I might add much of the development work was carried out here at Cranfield, and it's John Miles who's reporting.
For years, car designers have dreamt of a suspension system that would provide absolutely ideal handling and ride no matter what the load in the car, no matter how it was being driven or what the road surface was like. The problem is that even present-day suspension systems are a compromise. Even in this Lotus Esprit, for example, which is regarded as a paragon of ride and handling, with a conventional system, you have good handling at some expense in ride. Alternatively, if you want a car with very smooth ride, then one has to accept the greater and often uncomfortable attitude changes, particularly when the car is being cornered hard. Over the years, few companies have got the ride and handling of a traditional suspension system so consistently right as Lotus. Yet even their engineers realised that the way forward had to be with a suspension system that could offer optimum ride and handling at all times by adjusting itself to the various conditions imposed on it. Now, about 3 years ago, the aerodynamic downforce necessary for a fast lap time in Formula One racing depended entirely on keeping a consistent gap between the car body and the road. But to do this with a traditional suspension system meant raising the spring rates by a factor of 5 or 6, which led to a very, very harsh ride and even talk of drivers suffering brain damage as a result. Also, in slower corners, the car tended to skate across bumps and you lost grip. And it was an instrumentation program on a Formula One car carried out by Lotus in conjunction with the Cranfield Institute of Technology that led directly to a joint program to design and develop a totally new suspension system which would have complete control over the movements of the wheels, no matter what the aerodynamic loads were on the car and no matter what the track surface did. It was to use the very sophisticated electronic principles involved in the latest aircraft control systems. And Lotus and Cranfield decided to apply it in the first instance on a Lotus Esprit road car. To drive, it feels very like a normally sprung car, except that it doesn't roll when cornering or pitch when braking or accelerating. No roll means an exceptionally secure feel in corners and very good steering response. No roll in a conventional suspension system would automatically mean a very stiff suspension, but in most respects this car rides bumps as well, if not better, than the standard Esprit. To illustrate the way it works, one can take an example from the way the human brain controls the legs of a downhill skier. There's nothing very springy about muscle and bone, and yet by taking its cue from the nerves in the legs and the balance mechanism in the ear, the brain can make the legs behave just like a spring and damper. Now, in place of the sensing mechanisms in the human body are transducers which sense load, vertical wheel movement, lateral and longitudinal acceleration. And in place of the brain is a computer which can be programmed to provide an infinite number of handling characteristics. And the suspension medium itself is provided by very fast-acting hydraulic jacks. Let's say the computer has been programmed to keep the car's attitude level at all times. Now, if a wheel is displaced from the preset position by any action on the part of the driver or a bump in the road, the transducers immediately send the relevant information to the computer, which relays back the information necessary for the jacks to correct the car's attitude. This information is conveyed virtually instantaneously, and these special electrically operated servo valves can work up to 250 times a second, so in effect there is no delay in response whatever. As a research vehicle, the active suspension Lotus Esprit has already proved its worth. When suitably programmed, not only does it produce faster lap times than a conventionally sprung car, but the use of digital electronics in the computer allows the engineer to change the characteristics of the suspension or simulate a variety of suspension systems simply by dialing in another program. And this can even be done while on the move.
The project is very much in the research stage at the moment. We in Lotus Group have a particular application which is in racing. It's very early stages yet to think about putting it on a road car. We think there is an immediate application as a research vehicle in that we are able to program in by changing the computer program and make the car simulate almost any form of conventional suspension and quite a number of suspensions that you cannot achieve with springs and dampers and standard mechanical means. And this provides a very useful vehicle for testing, handling and suspension concepts. You can change them quickly, you can evaluate them without having to make very large changes to the car. One can derive an awful lot of numbers from the system because basically it runs on numbers. It works out the actual loads, the actual position of the car and uses these in the calculations. And so these numbers are readily available to be recorded and analysed.
And what about non-car applications? Is there a future there?
Yes, we originally developed the system to cope with an extreme two requirements for a suspension system, where the suspension had to cope with the bumps in the road and a very large external load, which is the aerodynamics. Now, there are other cases on vehicles which are similar to this, for instance, earth-moving vehicles, military vehicles, vehicles that have a very large range of payloads, or trying to push earth around or pull a plough or combat the recoil from a gun. It is possible to use this sort of suspension on those sort of vehicles and effectively have a suspension which copes with one situation one moment and another situation the next moment.